In a locked federal chamber buried 5 floors beneath Capitol Hill, Jasmine, Crockett stares across a silent table at Donald Trump, holding one rusted key and 19 years of buried contracts. She came to expose one secret floor in Trump Tower and one marriage that cost $4.2 million to keep smiling. As 6 senior lawmakers hold their breath, a blueprint, a recording, and one unsigned signature crack the vault open. 2 names, 1 basement, 0 escape. When power hides behind love, what happens when someone finally calls it by its real name? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. The silence in room 11 felt heavier than stone. No screens, no wires, no echoes. Just oak walls, a single long table, and the tension of 6 seasoned lawmakers trying not to glance at the woman at its head. Jasmine Crockett sat motionless, both hands wrapped tightly around an old rusted key, the kind that didn't belong to this century. Her suit was black, her jaw locked tight, and her eyes burned with something cold and calculated. She wasn't looking at the senators. She was staring dead at the man on the other end of the table, who hadn't stopped smirking since the second she walked in. Donald Trump leaned back in his chair like he was watching bad theater. Legs crossed, elbow on wood, chin balanced on knuckles. He looked bored, smug, untouchable. To him, this was a waste of government time, a nuisance, a pointless drama cooked up by a woman who'd never understand the game he'd already won. But Jasmine didn't blink. She stood up, lifted the key into the sterile white light, and spoke clearly. This, she said, her voice like a fuse just lit, is the key to somewhere no one's dared to enter. Trump let out a sharp laugh, slicing through the stillness like a blade. Let me guess, the closet where you keep your delusions. A few senators chuckled under their breath, uncomfortable but entertained. Jasmine didn't flinch. She unrolled a thick, creased blueprint and spread it wide across the table. Her fingers slid down the building diagram like a surgeon tracing a scar. Trump Tower, sub-level -5, not registered, not inspected, not declared to the city. Trump waved his hand lazily. Fake. Next question. He didn't even look at the blueprint. I've owned that building since before this one was born, he added, nodding toward Jasmine. And I think I'd know if I had a bat cave under my living room. Jasmine's tone never changed. Then explain this. 4 biometric locks, 1 matched to your retina, 1 to your voice, 1 to your palm, and the last a 6-digit code change in April 2017. The same week Melania was hospitalized. Quietly. Trump leaned forward, now grabbing the mic like he was ready to crush it. That guy's a liar, probably one of your ex-boyfriends, or some washed-up contractor who couldn't finish a basement. The room froze. Even the senators stopped shifting. Jasmine didn't respond, not yet. A red light blinked on the landline at the corner of the room. A staffer stiffened, picked up, whispered, then looked at Jasmine. She nodded once. The speaker crackled to life. A calm voice, male mid-40s, cut through the air. My name is Alan Richter. I was senior structural engineer during the 2004 and 2017 interior overhauls of Trump Tower. I confirm the existence of a 5th underground level, fully reinforced and sealed with biometric access. Retinal and palm print entry are matched to Donald J. Trump. The voice print system, too. There's no mistake. Trump's face drained of color in real time. The smirk cracked. His fingers twitched, then curled into a fist. For the first time, he didn't interrupt, didn't joke, didn't blink. Jasmine stared straight at him, then spoke into the mic. Thank you, Mr. Richter. That statement is now part of the official congressional record. Her voice dropped a notch lower, sharper than steel. He's not my ex. He's just one more man you tried to erase. Trump didn't move, didn't speak. And just like that, for the first time all morning, the silence finally belonged to him. And just as the silence thickened around Trump's breathless stillness, Jasmine pressed her hand flat against the blueprint right over the 5th sublevel and spoke with the precision of someone about to detonate truth itself. Her voice didn't rise, but the room leaned in involuntarily, as if drawn by gravity. Beneath sublevel 5, she said, slow and exact, isn't just concrete and silence. It's where the real contracts are buried, not the ones you file for taxes, not the glossy wedding day signatures. I'm talking about the ones that direct how a woman breathes, how she walks, how she smiles. She paused, eyes still locked on Trump's face. In that vault, she continued lifting a sealed document from her folder. We found the performance agreement between Donald Trump and Melania Trump. She unfolded the paper carefully, not for drama, but because it mattered. The senators leaned closer. The tension in the room wasn't rising. It was suffocating. Clause 19, she read aloud. The First Lady is prohibited from displaying negative emotional expressions in public. Violation incurs a penalty of $1 million per instance. The words slammed into the silence like a bomb. A few mouths fell open. One senator muttered something inaudible and sat back pale. Jasmine held the document steady in both hands, letting the weight of it land on every chest in the room. Trump's reaction was instant. He slammed his palm on the table hard, sending a water glass skidding across the wood. "This is bullshit," he barked, his voice suddenly raw and high. "You think anyone would marry you without rules?" His tone wasn't just angry, it was laced with venom, with something desperate hiding beneath bravado. The insult wasn't just aimed at Jasmine's credibility, it was a deliberate, ugly jab at her very existence. Something in the room cracked. The senators didn't speak, no one did, but their posture changed. They were no longer curious. They were watching a man lash out. Jasmine didn't flinch. She didn't raise her voice. She reached down, retrieved another sheet of paper, and placed it flat on the table, sliding it forward with one finger, like a chess piece in check. "This is a note from Trump's legal team," she said, voice cool as steel. "Remind Melania, do not frown when exiting Air Force One." The note was scrawled in quick ink, initialed in the corner, dated 3 days before a state visit. It wasn't a suggestion. It was an instruction, a command. One of the senators cleared his throat, leaned forward to interrupt. But before he could speak, Trump cut across him, flashing a razor grin. "Let her talk. Every time she opens her mouth, she loses voters." The room choked. Not a gasp, something quieter, like oxygen pulling back. Jasmine stood still. She didn't blink. Her hands rested gently on the edge of the table, but her voice, when it came, carried a kind of calm that silenced storms. "Every time I speak," she said, locking her eyes on Trump, like she was seeing through him, "a woman somewhere remembers she's not property." And in that instant, Trump didn't laugh. He didn't talk. He didn't move. He just sat there, body-rigid, lips pressed tight, as the room around him suddenly realized he wasn't in control anymore. Jasmine was. And just when the silence had done its damage and Trump's tantrum had lost its oxygen, Jasmine reached for something colder than any insult, something that didn't need to yell to destroy. She picked up the remote, pointed it at the blank wall behind her, and with one press, the room transformed. A projection screen dropped like a verdict. The lights dimmed just enough to let the images speak. No narration, no music, just a series of silent clips stitched together with surgical precision. Melania Trump, year after year, walking, waving, standing behind podiums, stepping off planes, smiling in slow bursts of 3 seconds or less. Never more, always less. Her beauty was unchanging, her silence rehearsed, her smiles measured like currency. Then Jasmine tapped again. Now the screen split. The same clips played, but this time overlaid with digital tracers. Red lines on cheekbones, blue grids on jawlines. Beneath it, a voice not Jasmine's, not emotional, just data began to speak. Facial expression restricted. Average muscle constriction, 96%. Duration of natural smile, 2.3 seconds. Likelihood of emotional suppression, high. There were no gasps this time, just breath held in the throat. A senator's hands tightened over his notes. Another stared at the screen like it was something radioactive. Because it was. It wasn't just footage, it was proof. The kind of proof that didn't need opinion. It only needed numbers. And the numbers were screaming. Trump suddenly slammed forward in his seat like someone had thrown ice water in his face. He jabbed a finger toward the screen and snapped. "She was just elegant. Not every wife needs to laugh like a monkey." The words ricocheted off the oak-paneled walls like gunshots. Brutal, unfiltered, vile. One senator stiffened. Another glanced at Jasmine, waiting for her to flinch. She didn't. She didn't move at all. Instead, she tapped the remote again. The image froze. A single still frame, Melania stepping off Air Force One. No press line, no fanfare, No cameras except the one buried in the protocol files. She was walking alone, arms rigid at her sides, face locked like marble. No smile, no blink. Just motion without expression. A woman performing silence like it was the only language she was allowed to speak. Jasmine didn't say a word. The clip did it for her. Then came the final moment, the one she'd saved like a final arrow pulled from the bone. She hit the button again. The screen went black. A small speaker clicked on, static, then breathing, then a single voice, low and uncertain, but undeniably hers. "Am I allowed to blink?" The words dropped like a blade in the center of the room. They didn't scream. They didn't beg. But they cut deeper than any accusation Jasmine could have made herself. Because that voice wasn't fighting. It was surrendering. Quietly, carefully, out of habit, and fear. Trump exploded. He shot to his feet, grabbed the black pen sitting in front of him, and hurled it across the table. "You stole that. That's private. You're a disgrace." His voice cracked not just with rage, but with something breaking underneath. Not power, not confidence, but control. And for the first time, it was gone. Jasmine didn't flinch. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. Because the room was already listening to the one voice Trump had tried hardest to silence. And just when the last echo of Melania's voice faded into silence, Jasmine reached for the document that made everything suddenly painfully real. Not digital, not theoretical, but human. She didn't raise it like a showpiece. She lifted it like a weight. Two creases ran straight through the middle of the page, and the paper had yellowed slightly at the edges, an ordinary file that had been buried beneath extraordinary silence. Jasmine unfolded it slowly and placed it flat on the table like she was setting down a body. Her voice dropped just enough to force everyone in the room to lean in. "This is a handwritten request from Melania Trump," she said, asking to be excused from 4 scheduled public appearances over a 14-day period. Her tone was steady, but there was something raw beneath it, like a wire strung too tight humming. The reasons: severe depressive symptoms, emotional fatigue, and what she described in her own handwriting as persistent feelings of being observed but unseen. A stillness took over the room, not reverence but discomfort. No one dared move. Jasmine turned the page. Her hand hovered over the second sheet, then pointed to a scribbled note in the margin. "Here," she continued, "is the response. A single line written in black ink by Donald J. Trump himself." She looked up, locking eyes with him. "It says, 'Denied. 4 events remaining this quarter.'" No signature, no explanation, just that cold transactional final. The paper was now center stage, but Jasmine didn't touch it again. It lay there like evidence from a crime scene, because that's what it was: a record of someone begging not for escape, but for air, and being told no. Then came the sound no one wanted to hear. A low scoff from the other end of the table, followed by a voice soaked in contempt. "Every model gets sad sometimes," Trump muttered, just loud enough for the mics to catch, just slow enough to slice. "That's why I married a quiet one." The words hit the room like a gut punch. No one gasped. This wasn't a moment for theatrics. It was a moment for quiet fury. One senator instinctively reached for his glass of water and stopped halfway. Another rubbed his temples and said nothing. Jasmine didn't react. Not right away. Because there are moments when silence is heavier than speech, and this was one of them. But Trump wasn't finished. As a senator tried to interject, his mouth halfway open, a hand lifted from the table, Trump jabbed his finger sideways without even turning his head. The same finger he used to sign contracts, dismiss aides, and point cameras. "She's turning this into a pity party. She wants attention." And that was it. The line he shouldn't have crossed. Jasmine finally moved, not fast, not loud, but with a stillness so controlled it made the air around her shift. She stepped slightly closer to the table, her fingertips grazing the edge of the document like she was anchoring herself. Her eyes locked onto Trump, not with anger, but with something harder: clarity. "I don't want attention. I want accountability." Her voice didn't shake. It didn't rise, but it carried weight. Enough to pin the room down word by word. And in that silence that followed, thicker than any argument, deeper than any insult, no one said a thing. Because Jasmine hadn't just responded, she had ended it. The pity party Trump accused her of, it collapsed under the truth. Not the truth in her mouth, but the one sitting on the table, inked by his own hand. And for the first time in that entire room, it wasn't about Melania or Jasmine or even the politics tangled between them. It was about what happens when control is so absolute it refuses to recognize exhaustion as a reason to pause. What happens when a woman asks to rest and is told not yet? What happens when pain is penciled into a schedule and ignored like it was an inconvenience? And what happens when someone finally reads it out loud? And just as Trump's last excuse dissolved under Jasmine's demand for accountability, she reached for a different kind of truth, not a request, but a receipt. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't even change her tone. Jasmine simply opened the next folder in front of her, pulled out a document, and slid it onto the table like a chess master placing a queen into position. It was clean, official, unforgiving. Wire transfer ledger, she said, tapping once. Dated 3 months after the presidential election. From Trump Organization account ending in 0164. Recipient Melania Trump. Amount $4.2 million. She paused not for effect, but to let the weight of the number settle over the room like a storm cloud. Then came the dagger purpose line reads, appearance, gala dinner hand-holding required. One senator blinked in disbelief. Another leaned back as if needing distance from the page. But Trump didn't move, not a muscle. His face, however, betrayed him. The color shifted slowly, climbing from his neck to his ears, and then flooding across his face like rising heat. Jasmine said nothing. She didn't need to. The silence that followed was louder than any accusation she could make. 40 full seconds passed, and Donald Trump, said nothing. She waited. Not out of cruelty, out of control. Her control. When it was clear he wouldn't respond, Jasmine calmly reached for the next document, her fingers gliding over the paper like she was drawing back the curtain on a locked room. This clause, she said, reading directly from a highlighted segment, states that Melania would be fined $1.5 million if she failed to attend Thanksgiving dinner with her husband. She looked up slowly, her voice sharpened like a blade being turned. Not a national address, not a state emergency. Thanksgiving. Still no response. Just tight jaws and unblinking eyes from the men lining the table. Men who had seen deals, wars, and scandal. But this was something else. This was power repackaged as paperwork. This was intimacy turned into invoices. And finally Trump spoke. Not loud, not sarcastic, just quiet, as if the words were being scraped off the bottom of his throat. She knew the rules. I gave her the world. It was a line built to sound noble, but there was nothing noble in the delivery. His eyes didn't lift. His fingers drummed against the table. His voice didn't carry. It retreated. Jasmine didn't answer. Instead, she reached into her briefcase and retrieved a document sealed in a transparent evidence sleeve, clean, crisp, untouched. This is the amended version of the marriage agreement, she said, voice calm, eyes locked. Dated 2017. It included revisions to appearance obligations, asset access, and behavioral clauses. She turned the page slowly. And this right here at the bottom is the signature of Melania Trump. She placed it face up for all to see. Except she continued this signature wasn't signed in 2017. Her eyes narrowed slightly. It was extracted from a scanned form from 2010, 7 years earlier, copied, cropped, and inserted without legal authentication. She took a beat, one breath. Then in short, Mr. Trump, this isn't a signature. It's a forgery. The room didn't move. Even air seemed to stop circulating. Trump didn't lunge forward this time, he snapped. Like a cable pulled too tight for too long. He shoved his chair back with a screech, stood halfway out of it, and slammed his fist on the table hard enough to rattle the water glasses. That's a lie. I'll sue you and your whole family. His voice was no longer a command. It was a scream. The mask had cracked. This wasn't a president. It wasn't even a businessman. It was a man unspooling in real time, surrounded by evidence he could no longer outrun. But Jasmine didn't flinch. She didn't move. Her hands stayed by her side. Her voice stayed steady. Because the moment he shouted, he lost. He wasn't in charge of the room anymore. She was. And the silence after his threat was no longer fear. It was judgment. Cold. Absolute. Irreversible. The room dimmed slightly as the side door opened again, not by accident, not by surprise, but by design. Jasmine didn't look. She simply said, "Please come in." The woman who entered wasn't in heels or makeup. She wore a nurse's uniform with a faded name tag, Emily Rowe. No one clapped. No one even blinked. But the air shifted. I was assigned to the Trump Tower medical rotation from 2016 to 2019, she said, standing stiffly. I treated Melania on 2 occasions. The first was after a fall down a private stairwell. The second was after she passed out in an elevator. The room was motionless. Only Trump shifted in his chair, shoulders tightening. Jasmine raised the remote, slowly pressed a button, and let the screen behind her flicker to life. A single image appeared, grainy, gray-toned, time-stamped, unmistakable. It showed Melania inside an elevator at sub-level 5. Her hands weren't holding a clutch. They were clutching her own face as if shielding herself from something invisible. Her body curled inward, shoulders shaking. She was crying. Not politely, not glamorously, but with the full, silent despair of someone who'd run out of places to scream. A senator looked away. One assistant clenched their jaw. No one could pretend anymore that this was just about contracts and politics. This was about a woman caged. Trump didn't sit still. He shoved his chair back hard enough to screech, rising like a man about to erupt. His face burned, red jaw, clenched tight arms rigid at his sides. He took one heavy step backward, the motion reckless, violent, like a man either about to leave or destroy something. But then Jasmine's voice sliced through the room like steel through fabric. "Sit down, you're still under oath." She didn't yell. She didn't beg. Her words didn't rise, they dropped like bricks. And Trump froze. Legs locked, eyes wide, lips parted but speechless. For the first time all day, his feet obeyed her voice. He sat, and that was when Jasmine moved forward, slow, methodical, no longer needing paper projection or precedent. She looked not at Trump, but through him. She was isolated, monitored, paid to smile, fined for blinking, reprimanded for emotions. And when she collapsed, you gave her instructions, not empathy. Her voice didn't crack, it sharpened. "Do you know what the nurse said when Melania woke up?" Jasmine glanced to the side. Emily nodded, eyes glassy. Then Jasmine turned back to Trump, eyes locked. "You built a prison underground and dared to call it a marriage." The room was airless. Trump didn't speak. He didn't defend. He didn't flinch. His eyes dropped to the table, hands clenched on either side, knuckles pale. And in that heavy, unsparing silence, something broke, not in Jasmine's voice, but in his. Because he said nothing. Absolutely nothing. And for a man built entirely on noise, that silence was the loudest confession he'd ever made. Trump's silence after Jasmine's declaration still weighed on the room like storm clouds, but she wasn't done. She reached next for the proof. No spin doctor, no PR machine, and no billionaire mogul in that room could ever deny. Jasmine retrieved from her briefcase a black binder, unmarked and oddly weightless. Nothing fancy, no branding or seals, but heavy with implication. As she laid it on the table, the air seemed to thicken. She opened to a page halfway in. The blueprint spread out like a hidden map. Stark lines, precise measurements, and chilling intent. Room 13 by 14 feet. Steel bar internals. No windows. No cameras. No wiring. Empty except for a sleek metal chair bolted to the floor, a narrow padded bench strapped down beside it, and walls lined completely in soundproof padding. At the corner of the page, scrawled in red ink and underlined twice, was the chilling annotation. For Melania's emotional recovery, no unauthorized human contact, no flourish, no quotation marks, just a terse command. Jasmine's voice didn't crack, but it deepened. There is no oversight, no cameras, no daylight, blank walls, no clocks, no clocks. She repeated it slowly, letting the phrase settle, letting each repetition land like a brick. A pause followed 1 second, then 2, as senators looked at each other, processing. Some shifted uncomfortably, others didn't move at all. Trump's eyes didn't drift. He stared at the table, waiting, or maybe bracing. Jasmine kept going. She flipped the page deliberately. "Call it therapy if you want," she continued, "but therapists call a room like this sensory deprivation." Her voice was crisp, calm, relentless. "They built a barrel of isolation, no light, no sound, no human contact, and called it healing." The room leaned inward. You could hear the distant hum of the underground systems. But no one dared breathe. Trump's breathing was steady. his posture rigid. Then Jasmine slid a bright red piece of paper across the blueprint. The note read, "Emotional Recovery Suite Room, 5B Melania only. No unapproved visits." Trump looked down at the note, his jaw tightening, but he stayed silent. Jasmine pressed further. "I have text messages found hidden in server backups, because Room 5B didn't exist on any floor plan publicly submitted to the city. This was damning. No permits, no filings, no oversight, just secrecy buried beneath the tower." A senator leaned forward. Trump raised his hand as if to speak, but then paused. The blue veins on his temple throbbed. He looked around, but there were no cameras, no microphones broadcasting, no crowd dead set on his soundbite. Just 6 people in the room, plus Jasmine, who stood like a sentinel of truth. She spoke directly. "You called this therapy, or was it emotional quarantine?" Her words echoed softly, forcefully, as if they ricocheted off the steel door hidden beneath Trump Tower. The question landed like a verdict, merging accusation and exposure into one loaded sentence. Trump's face tightened as though slapped. He didn't respond. He didn't blink. His eyes dropped. His hands curled into fists at his sides. The stillness in the room thickened, forming a wall that no statement could pass through. Jasmine stayed poised, but the intensity in her gaze dialed higher. Her feet were rooted, not reverent, not pleading, just unwavering conviction. For a long beat, nothing happened. Then the first senator inched a hand over to adjust a tie. Another quietly cleared his throat, but no one spoke to fill the void. Because what hung in the air wasn't emptiness, it was exposure. Secrets laid bare, contracts gone rogue, isolation mistaken for care. Jasmine turned her back to no one. She stared down the blueprint and whispered, not to paper, but to the room. "They built a prison." She paused. Her voice thickened. "They built a prison beneath ground level." She inhaled. Each word weighted, and dared to call it marriage. She didn't shout. She let the accusation breathe in the silence she conjured. For the first time in the entire hearing, Trump stirred. One slow motion, a hand raised to his forehead, then dropped. The flush of anger was gone. He was drained. No fight turned up on his face, just shock, dread, incapacitated authority. It was the moment someone breaks inside without making a move. Jasmine folded the binder shut and placed it back into the briefcase, as though closing the lid on a coffin. She didn't flash a victory smile. She simply turned her gaze to the assembled senators. Her shoulders sat square. Her voice returned, not accusatory now, but expectant. Because she had shown them the blueprint. She'd unsealed the secret chamber and questioned it. The rest of the hearing, its aftermath, its fallout, would happen without her interference. In that moment, the room had already transformed. It was no longer a sterile congressional hearing. It had become a space where power had been exposed and someone's silent suffering given shape. Trump remained perfectly still, unguarded, voiceless, irreparably exposed. And Jasmine didn't need to ask another question. The silence that followed was not confusion. It was reckoning. A silent verdict laid on wood paneling, hidden blueprints, and a woman's dignity restored through courage and words. No further testimony can change what had just been said, and no further noise could rival what was left unsaid. After the blueprints, after the blue room, with no clocks and the prison beneath the empire, Jasmine knew the next truth wasn't a weapon, it was a wound, and yet she held it just the same. She reached into the inner lining of her blazer, slow, steady, like someone drawing a relic from centuries ago. No folders, no files this time. Just an envelope. White weathered edges wrinkled from having been folded and unfolded too many times. There was no official seal, no legal watermark, no golden crest. Only a name scrawled in elegant handwriting that wavered in pressure, Melania. Jasmine placed it on the table gently, like it might shatter from sound alone. Her fingertips lingered on it for a moment before sliding it forward to the center of the room. "This was found," she said quietly, "beneath a pillow in room 5B. Not addressed to anyone, not even signed at the bottom, but unmistakably hers." There was no projection in her voice now. No fire, only gravity. Something more sacred than rage. The senators leaned in. A pen dropped somewhere in the back of the room, but no one turned to look. Every eye, even the ones trying not to, shifted toward the envelope, even Trump's. Jasmine unfolded the single sheet of paper inside its creases sharp from time, its corners curled from long, anxious fingers. She laid it open across the wood, like she was setting down something holy. The ink was fading blue, but the words were clear, printed in Melania's native Slovenian. Jasmine tapped the bottom line. A red pencil circle surrounded one sentence, underlined once. She didn't read it out loud. She simply let it sit for a second. Then she pointed to the handwritten English translation beneath it. I am not a brand. No dramatics, no introduction, just 5 words, small, stark, surgical. The sentence landed like a final confession, a whisper louder than any scream that had come before it. The room didn't gasp. The room didn't murmur. The room stopped. There was something about the way it was written, not just translated, but felt. It wasn't political. It wasn't performative. It was exhausted. It was raw. It was the sound of someone breaking a contract, not with violence, but with clarity. No metaphors, no coded messaging, just the raw pulse of a woman who had been paraded as an ornament for so long she had to remind herself what she wasn't. Across the table, Donald Trump didn't scoff. He didn't interrupt. He didn't offer one of his usual snide comebacks laced with condescension or cruelty. He didn't accuse anyone of lying. His jaw didn't tighten in anger. His fingers didn't drum on the table. He didn't even blink. He just froze. His mouth opened slightly as if to form a word, a defense anything. But nothing came. Nothing made it past the lump in his throat or the steel wall in his mind. The man who'd torn through hearings, debates, headlines, and scandals with volcanic bravado was for the first time in that room silent, fully nakedly disarmed. Jasmine didn't move. She didn't press. She didn't add flourish to the moment. She simply stared at the letter and laid her palm flat over it, as if shielding it from the weight of all the eyes now fixed on it. The room was so still it felt wrong to breathe. She didn't shout it. Jasmine finally said, her voice quiet but unshakable. She wrote it, alone, in the dark, in a room built to contain her, and she still found a way to say it. A senator cleared his throat but said nothing. Another turned slightly in his chair, folding his arms, but his eyes didn't leave the paper. No one dared speak, not because they feared Trump, this was beyond him now, but because there are moments when human truth speaks louder than any politics ever could. And this was one of them. Trump lowered his head. His hands remained clenched on his lap. He didn't look at Jasmine. He didn't look at the paper. He looked inward, somewhere deeper or darker, or far more distant than even he knew. The man who once towered over cameras, microphones, and marble podiums now looked barely taller than the weight of the truth before him. And Jasmine. She didn't lean in for the kill. She didn't deliver a follow-up jab or final blow. She let the moment stand. Because this wasn't about vengeance. This was about recognition. This was about finally saying out loud what had only ever been buried behind closed doors, behind smiles too short, behind eyes too quiet. She straightened her spine, her voice no louder than a breath, and added, "Not every truth needs to be shouted. Some arrive as a whisper, strong enough to break an empire." The words hovered above the table like mist on water, soft, still impossible to escape. She folded the letter slowly, delicately, as if respecting it. She tucked it back into the envelope, then placed it gently in front of her again. The act was so simple, so small, but it held the gravity of a funeral eulogy, except this wasn't a burial of a person. It was the burial of a facade. Trump didn't move, didn't lift his head, didn't shake it in denial or bang the table in defiance. His silence was not strategic. It wasn't stubborn. It was a different kind of noise. The kind that only comes when someone who's controlled every narrative finally sees one they can't spin. The kind of silence that doesn't end a hearing, but begins the reckoning. In that one sentence, 5 words scribbled in solitude, a marriage, a myth, a power structure cracked. Jasmine didn't need to explain it. She just needed to let it speak. And for once in Donald Trump's long, loud firestorm of a life, he had no idea how to answer. The silence that followed Melania's handwritten words wasn't just quiet, it was sacred. For the first time in the entire hearing, no one dared look at Trump. And Jasmine Crockett knew exactly what to do with that moment, carve it into history before power could erase it. Jasmine didn't rise immediately. She sat in the gravity of that silence for just a beat longer, letting its meaning soak into the walls of room 11, like a confession that no longer wanted to hide. The envelope bearing Melania's pain still lay on the table, its edges fluttering slightly under the central air, like it too was breathing for the first time. Jasmine slowly slid the envelope aside and replaced it with a clean sheet. No tears, no ink stains, no pain. This paper was different. It wasn't from the past. It was for the future. She stood now not in defiance but with the unshakable weight of purpose. No anger in her tone, no theatrics. Just the razor-sharp calm of a woman who had seen enough damage to know that healing wasn't optional. It was overdue. "I didn't walk into this chamber to humiliate a man," Jasmine said evenly, voice like velvet wrapped around steel. "I walked in to confront a system, one that let a woman be edited, scripted, corrected, and silenced for 2 decades, and then called it marriage." A senator leaned back in his chair, visibly uneasy. Another tapped his pen in small anxious circles. But Jasmine didn't flinch. She reached into her folder and unfolded a single page, white, crisp, unblemished. She held it up. "This is not an accusation. It's legislation. It's called the Melania Clause." The title alone sent a ripple through the room. Trump didn't speak. Maybe he thought silence would shield him from the sting of having his wife's name carved into federal memory, not as an accessory to his empire, but as the foundation for a new law meant to undo what he built. Jasmine took a breath, her eyes now scanning every face at the table. This clause would prohibit the enforcement or creation of contractual conditions in any marriage, especially those connected to political figures that penalize, restrict, or condition emotional behavior. No woman should be fined for frowning, no partner should be punished for expressing distress, and no clause in any prenup should wield more power than a person's basic right to exist as a human being. The words landed with the kind of power that didn't raise its voice, it just cut deeper with every syllable. A few senators shifted in their chairs. One of them, a man in his 60s with a reputation for loyalty to Trump, leaned forward, elbows on the table, but said nothing. Even he couldn't craft a counter-argument that wouldn't sound like an endorsement of control. "This isn't anti-marriage," Jasmine continued. "This isn't even anti-Trump. This is anti-erasure, anti-shame, anti-contractual cages disguised as romance. Because behind every clause, like the ones we've exposed today, lies a message. You don't get to be human if it embarrasses me." And I'm telling you, we're done writing that message into law. Trump still hadn't moved. His hands were folded now, fingers twitching slightly as they rested against each other. For a man who once thundered through press rooms and podiums with invincibility, his silence was louder than any insult he'd ever thrown. Jasmine didn't look at him. She looked straight ahead past him. "The Melania Clause will ensure that any legal agreement which limits emotional expression in a domestic partnership connected to public office is deemed unenforceable and unethical under federal review," she explained. "It empowers women and men in public marriages to maintain autonomy over their emotional well-being without fear of penalty, monetary or otherwise. Because love," she added, "should not come with a non-disclosure clause on your own pain." A female senator 2 seats down adjusted her blazer and leaned back, visibly nodding for the first time since the hearing began. Something was shifting not just in the chamber, but in the mindset of those who thought emotional control was simply a side effect of power. Jasmine capitalized on the moment. "Today we exposed fine print that turned a woman into a silhouette, that replaced comfort with compliance, that demanded performance in exchange for protection. But we are not here to weep for Melania. We are here to make sure no one else gets assigned her script." She stepped forward now, placing printed drafts of the clause in front of each senator, 6 copies each marked with a single red line drawn underneath the phrase, "freedom of emotional autonomy within political unions." Jasmine stood at the head of the table again, chin high, her shadow falling across the words she'd just delivered. "You don't have to agree with everything I've said today," she told them. "You don't have to like me. But if you walk out of here and pretend that what happened to that woman was just a series of choices, that she smiled less because she's cold, that she cried in elevators because she's fragile, then you're not protecting democracy, you're scripting it." Trump finally moved, but not to interrupt, not to shout, just a slow shift in his seat, as if the ground beneath him was no longer something he trusted. He rubbed one finger against his thumb in small unconscious circles. Jasmine saw it but didn't acknowledge it. She didn't need to. His silence was her closing statement. She looked to the oldest senator at the table, a man who had served across 5 administrations, and said, "We can't legislate love, but we can legislate cruelty. We can dismantle the mechanics that turn affection into asset management. We can choose to stop looking the other way when silence is signed in gold ink." Then, almost as an afterthought, but not really, Jasmine placed one last paper in the center of the table. A photo of Melania years ago, before the contract, before the title, before the role. She wasn't smiling, but she wasn't numb either. Her eyes were clear, alive. "We owe her more than applause for survival," Jasmine whispered. "We owe her laws that never made it necessary in the first place." For one breathless minute, no one spoke. And in that silence, something sacred unfolded, not just for Melania, but for every unnamed woman who had ever been told to smile through it, nod politely, and stand there just like that. Jasmine didn't just hold the floor, she redefined its purpose, and Room 11 would never forget it. After the final clause of the proposed law echoed into silence, Room 11 didn't erupt. It didn't move. It exhaled as if the chamber itself had been holding its breath for years. Trump sat completely still, shoulders hunched but stiff, as though unsure whether to slump or square up. His eyes weren't roaming anymore. They were fixed on a space just past the edge of the table, unfocused, distant. The fire that once blazed behind his bravado had dwindled into a quiet, sullen flicker. No more interruptions. No more insults. His signature bluster had dissolved, replaced by something almost foreign on his face, quiet. His fingers twitched restlessly, clenching and unclenching, as if trying to hold on to something invisible. Perhaps it was power, perhaps it was denial, or maybe for the first time it was the weight of a truth he couldn't bury with noise. Across from him, Jasmine Crockett didn't gloat. She didn't soften. Her presence wasn't loud, but it radiated like heat off of iron. She'd fought too hard to let this moment slip into pity. She hadn't come for revenge. She came for revelation. And now, with every document laid bare and every mask burned away, she delivered her final words, not for Trump, but for the history that would follow. "I didn't destroy you," she said, her voice low and even. "I just removed the mask you glued onto someone else." The sentence didn't break him with volume. It broke him with precision. For a man who had shaped his entire legacy through image, through control, through narrative, being stripped of the illusion he cast on another human being was the most unbearable defeat of all. And he couldn't argue it. Not anymore. No one rushed to his defense. No loyalists sprang to their feet. The 6 lawmakers present, once handpicked for their discretion and deference, remained seated for a moment longer. Eyes on their notes, their shoes anywhere but him. Then one by one they stood, not in protest, not in support, but in acknowledgement. They walked out in silence, each step like a page turning in a story that could no longer be rewritten. Trump remained seated. Jasmine turned slowly, leaving behind only her case file and the rusted key that had unlocked every lie. Her heels clicked softly across the floor, steady and unshaken. She didn't look back. There was nothing left in that room she needed to see. She already knew the look of a man undone, not by politics, not by scandal, but by the truth he thought no one would ever dare to say out loud. As the heavy door shut behind her with a deep wooden thud, the frame trembled slightly. It was not the kind of slam that demanded attention. It was the kind that ended things. Permanently. Outside, the city was wet. Rain had started hours earlier, gentle but constant, soaking the marble steps of the Capitol and leaving the night bathed in cold reflections. Headlights slid across the streets like ghosts, and in the shadow of that silence across the city, the golden glow of Trump Tower flickered against the fog like a dying flame, trying to stay relevant. At precisely 1:43 a.m., a figure emerged through the rotating doors. No escort, no entourage, no press. Just a woman in a long slate coat and a navy blue wool hat that sat low over her brow. In one hand, she held a single black suitcase, its corners scuffed, its zippers dulled by time. Her stride wasn't hurried, but it wasn't hesitant either. It was the walk of someone who had made peace with the past and no longer asked permission to leave it behind. She didn't glance up at the glowing letters of the tower behind her. She didn't look around to see who might be watching, because for once she didn't care. She wasn't walking toward a future someone else had scripted for her. She was simply walking away from a place that once tried to erase her. The doorman didn't stop her. He saw the look in her eyes. So did the building's night manager, who turned away with a quiet nod of respect as she passed. No questions, no resistance, only understanding. This was not an escape. It was a declaration. In her coat pocket was a copy of the letter Jasmine had read aloud just hours earlier, the one written not in English, but in her native tongue. A letter that simply said, "I am not a brand." It was the first time in years that her own voice had been heard unfiltered, unscripted, and hers. Inside the tower, Trump's private floor remained dark. No staff dared enter. The lights from the gold-trimmed chandeliers stayed off, as if they too refused to shine for him. His office door remained ajar, but he didn't sit at his desk. He didn't stand at the window. He simply sat in a leather chair, motionless, watching the screen of his phone fade to black over and over again, each time a silent reminder that the calls had stopped. No tweets, no statements, no counterattack. The man who once boasted he could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and not lose a vote had just lost the one thing he'd always claimed to control the narrative. Meanwhile, back on Capitol grounds, Jasmine stood alone in the hallway just outside room 11. Her hands were at her sides, her breath steady. For a long moment, she didn't move. She simply listened to the echo of her own footsteps, to the faint click of lights powering down for the night, and to the sound of a door far away, finally closing without being slammed. A staffer stepped forward from the shadows. "Do you need an escort to your car?" Ma'am. Jasmine shook her head. "No, I can walk." And she did, alone. Not because no one stood with her, but because she had walked through worse and still made it to this moment. She had entered that room not as someone seeking revenge, but as someone delivering reckoning. And now, with the lies exposed and the silence broken, she didn't need applause. She didn't need cameras. She needed only the quiet. Because that was how real change begins, not with noise, but with truth whispered until it becomes impossible to ignore. And somewhere down a dimly lit street, a woman with a suitcase walked into a waiting taxi. She didn't say her name. She didn't give her destination. But as the door closed behind her and the vehicle disappeared into the fog, the message was clear. She was never anyone's brand. She was never anyone's property. And now she was free. As the cab carrying the woman vanished into the fog and the Capitol lights dimmed behind Jasmine's last steps, a deeper silence settled in, not of defeat but of reckoning. And in that silence, the story began to echo. This was never just about one man or one woman. It wasn't just about power or marriage or a vault beneath a building wrapped in gold. It was about the spaces we don't talk about, the invisible prisons built behind designer gowns, within photo ops, and beneath headlines that turn people into brands. It was about how easily dignity can be signed away in exchange for silence, how control wears a smile, and how even the most elegant cages are still cages. For years, Melania had been painted as complicit, mysterious, untouchable. But what this story revealed wasn't complicity, it was captivity. And for every woman who had been told to smile more, to speak less, to stay quiet for the sake of appearances, this was their thunderstorm breaking the silence. Jasmine Crockett didn't enter that room to humiliate a man. She entered it to remind the world that control is not love, that contracts can't measure consent, and that even in the most powerful circles, a voice once buried can still rise like fire. She didn't demand vengeance. She demanded recognition. And in doing so, she tore open a truth that too many had learned to ignore. The Melania Clause wasn't just a line on paper. It was a mirror. A mirror held up to governments, corporations, marriages, and systems that commodify women behind closed doors and call it strategy. It forced lawmakers to ask, what does freedom look like when the cage is invisible? The clause didn't name names. It didn't call for arrests. It called for clarity. It called for a redefinition of dignity, not just in politics, but in every boardroom, every marriage contract, every silence expected from a woman in the name of status. Jasmine didn't say it out loud, but her actions screamed a question. What happens to the world when women stop asking permission to feel? That was the real threat. Not the documents, not the blueprints, but the refusal to play by the unspoken rules that have governed power for centuries. When Melania's letter whispered, "I am not a brand," it cracked a century-old spell. And when Jasmine amplified it with the weight of law, it became a revolution. The lawmakers who left that room didn't walk away with just facts. They walked away with shame. Shame that they had overlooked the quiet signals, that they had treated dignity as negotiable, that they allowed silence to be mistaken for peace. And across the country, in cities and small towns, people watched not through leaked footage, not through edited news segments, but through the conversations that ripple when something real has finally broken through the noise. Did you hear what she said? Did you see his face when? Did you know that was legal? This wasn't just a story, it was a shifting, a rearrangement of what's tolerated, what's hidden, what's excused. The Melania Clause demanded that marriage, especially those wrapped in power, could no longer hide behind performative love and weaponized contracts. It reminded us that emotional labor isn't free, that presence isn't consent, that public silence often hides private despair. And most of all, it reminded us that human beings are not products, not even in gold towers. But the lesson didn't end with legislation. It ended in the hearts of every person who'd ever watched a loved one shrink into silence. It ended in the mirror of every woman who'd been told she was too emotional, too dramatic, too loud. It ended with every man who realized that power does not equal protection and that domination dressed as devotion is still abuse. Jasmine's final words: "I didn't destroy you. I just removed the mask you glued onto someone else weren't an attack. They were a mercy. A scalpel cutting away the rot without apology." In that moment, Trump didn't crumble from exposure. He crumbled from emptiness. Because the empire he'd built wasn't made of truth, it was made of performance. And when the performance ended, nothing stood in its place. That's the danger of power without soul. It leaves you rich, loud, and completely hollow when the curtain falls. For Jasmine, walking away wasn't a victory lap. It was a continuation, because there will always be another room, another vault, another woman's silence behind velvet walls. But now there's a precedent, there's a law, there's a name. Melania Claus will not reverse the past, but it makes sure the next man who tries to buy silence learns that silence has teeth now. That behind every quiet wife might stand someone like Jasmine, unapologetic, relentless, and unwilling to shut up just to make the room comfortable. And for Melania, this wasn't just freedom. It was the reclamation of herself, the right to blink without asking, to leave a building without negotiation, to wear her face without being fined for frowning. She didn't need a press conference or a memoir. Her truth wasn't in interviews, it was in the decision to walk away without flinching. And sometimes the most powerful act of rebellion is to leave and never look back. So what's the lesson in all this? It's simple, but seismic: dignity is not negotiable, and silence is not consent. We must stop rewarding those who turn human beings into props. We must stop romanticizing obedience. We must teach our daughters that being loved isn't worth being erased, and our sons that domination isn't masculinity, it's cowardice in costume. Power should protect, not possess. And the systems that allow these silent prisons to thrive must be rebuilt not to punish, but to prevent. Because there are still women out there blinking in code, still contracts with clauses that kill the soul in increments, still towers without windows, still love stories with no room for freedom, but not anymore, not without a fight. Because now the blueprint has been exposed, the vault has been opened, and the key, it was never rusted. It was just waiting for someone brave enough to turn it. There comes a moment after every truth is spoken when silence no longer means peace, it means reckoning. What happened in that congressional chamber, far beneath the marble and monuments of Washington, wasn't just about a powerful man, a hidden vault, or a broken contract disguised as marriage. It was about what we allow, what we overlook, and what we silently participate in when we let power rewrite the meaning of love, loyalty, and dignity. Jasmine Crockett didn't just confront Donald Trump. She confronted every system that had told women for generations to smile through silence, to obey under pressure, to disappear behind titles like First Lady or Perfect Wife. And now, as the echoes of that final statement, "You built a prison beneath the ground, and you called it marriage," still reverberate through those hidden halls, we are left with one question: what will we do with what we've seen? Because this isn't just his story. This is about every woman who has been turned into an accessory, every person whose humanity was bartered for branding, whose pain was edited out of press releases and replaced with red carpet photos. It's about the cost of image and the cages we build in the name of perfection. Look around you. How many contracts have we accepted without reading the fine print? How many times have we told someone to just stay, just smile, just be grateful, even when their soul was slowly being locked away in a room with no windows? The Melania Clause is more than proposed legislation. It's a mirror. It forces us to ask whether we value the internal well-being of individuals as much as we value the external symbols of success. Do we still define partnership by power, silence, by grace, and obedience by love? Or are we finally ready to rewrite the terms? You don't have to be Melania to understand the weight of performance. Maybe you've never stood beside a former president, but perhaps you've stood in a hallway holding in tears because someone told you crying would make you look weak. Maybe you've been praised for being calm when inside you were screaming. Maybe you've smiled for photos when your heart felt like it was breaking open under the weight of expectations. This is not just about marriage, it's about any dynamic where power replaces consent, where affection is earned through compliance, and where identity is lost in the shadow of someone else's ambition. And so here is the call. If you are in a place where your dignity is conditional, your worth is measured by how quiet you can remain, or your love is judged by how much of yourself you're willing to erase, step back. Breathe. Look again. Ask who wrote these rules. Who benefits from your silence? And most importantly, what would your life look like if you rewrote those terms yourself? For the bystanders, it's time to stop treating control as charisma and coercion as strength. Power without empathy is not leadership. Charm without accountability is not virtue. And a man who builds rooms underground to hide his wife's humanity should not be called a protector. He should be called what he is afraid of, a woman with her own voice. That is the war we are still fighting. Not just over policy or protocol, but over permission. The permission to feel, to speak, to cry, to rage, to leave. And most radically of all, the permission to be fully, messily, beautifully human in a world that keeps asking women to be statues. If this story moves, you don't let it stop at sympathy. Let it spark something. Talk to your daughter about the difference between control and care. Ask your mother about the compromises she made in silence. Look at your friends, your coworkers, your community, and check the contracts we've all internalized. Speak when it's uncomfortable. Intervene when it's not your problem. And vote like someone's soul is at stake, because it is. Jasmine Crockett stood alone in a room no camera could enter, but millions of women heard her. Not just because she exposed a man, but because she exposed a myth. The myth that if you wear the right dress, marry the right man, smile in the right photos, you will be safe. There is no safety in submission, only a slow fading of the self. Let's not allow another generation to disappear in luxury prisons. The vault beneath Trump Tower is a symbol, but there are vaults in living rooms, vaults in boardrooms, vaults in the smiles of women who've been trained to disappear. Open them. Ask questions. Push back. And remember when Jasmine said I didn't destroy him, I removed the mask he glued onto someone else. She wasn't just talking about Donald Trump. She was talking about every system that paints over pain with power and calls it success. That's the work now. To remove the masks, to change the definitions, to make sure no one ever has to ask, am I allowed to blink ever again? Your voice matters. Your empathy is power. Your refusal to look away is revolution. And if one woman in a sealed room can shake the floorboards of an empire, imagine what all of us can do together in the light. So here's where it begins, not in a courtroom, not on a headline, but in the quiet moments when you decide what kind of world you will tolerate. Change doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers through a choice to tell the truth at work, when everyone else stays silent to defend someone, when there's nothing to gain to break a rule that was only built to cage you. Every small act of defiance is a crack in the armor of complacency. Every honest question is a hammer against the wall of fear. We are not waiting for saviors, we are becoming the proof that conscience still counts. Jasmine's story was never about revenge. It was about reclamation of truth, of worth of voice, and now it belongs to all of us. So carry it forward. Let it unsettle you. Let it ignite you. Let it remind you that history bends only when hands push together. Don't just watch, join the tremor. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.